So welcome everybody to Ecosystem North. My name is Jamie Sunsbach. Each week, Ecosystem North shines a spotlight on the people and organizations that support our region's entrepreneurs, uncovering the real story of what inspires and drives them to be entrepreneurial champions. So welcome to the first episode of this podcast. I'm excited to be kicking off this podcast today, and hopefully over the next weeks, months, and years, really truly celebrating the ecosystem builders, those people in the trenches supporting entrepreneurs day in and day out, helping to tell their stories as well as celebrate what they do here in the region. So when it came to sort of putting together a list of the people I wanted to talk to, I definitely wanted to speak to this person first for a couple of reasons. One, because it's pretty easy to get her because I work with her. And the second part is she's done a lot of work kind of at the other end of this, of being the person that's done a ton of interviews with entrepreneurs and ecosystem organizations and just amazing people in our community. So we definitely wanted to have as our first podcast guest, Amanda Leightner, Director of Communications, and again, my teammate at Collider. So welcome, Amanda.
Thanks. It does feel weird to be on the other end of the interview, I have to say.
Well, that's what we're going for. We're going to turn the tables on you today. So I think I'm really excited. I think, I probably know a little bit about you and your background, but really, I think a lot of people in this community don't. So, could you tell us a little bit about, where you grew up and really what brought you here to the Rochester area?
Yeah, so I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, for pretty much my whole life. Lived there until I was 20, about. Um, Grew up in a very close family. We were Italian American, so we had Sunday dinners every Sunday together, and they still do. I grew up, I would say my family was fairly entrepreneurial. My dad, my whole family worked in the steel industry growing up in Pittsburgh, and he had his own welding and manufacturing business, which he still. I think they just shut it down this past year, but he had that for years, so got a little taste of what that was like growing up. But I went to college in Pittsburgh. I was the first person from my family to go to college. So that was exciting, and I'm glad I had that opportunity. But I went to school in Oakland, Pennsylvania. And I think, my family saw that as a way to build a better future for me. So, I think a lot of the times when people are thinking of what's a better future, it's being a doctor. So that's originally what I was going to do. I had thought about, the very first thing I ever wanted to do was I wanted to train Shamu. So that was the first, thing I ever, there's a lot to unpack there, but.
Yeah, definitely. I did you go to SeaWorld or did you just, were you fascinated by Shamu?
No, I did go to SeaWorld. Then I wanted to be a marine biologist, then realized that's a very challenging field to, work in, and didn't really, I lived by rivers and grew up in the river system, but typically those are like on the coast or something like that. So, so that kind of faded. Then I was going to be a veterinarian, and then, thought about, do I want to be an MD? So I went to school at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Somehow, I still don't even know how this happened, got more on the science track, molecular biology, and doing biomedical research. I think that's because of the school, and Pittsburgh has a lot of biomedical engineering, biomedical research. So that's kind of the track I got pushed into. Actually, in my opinion, there weren't a lot of support for people who were more interested in the physician route there, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that was just my perspective or my experience or not, but that's what I experienced. One of the summers I was at Carnegie Mellon, I actually got a internship at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. So that's where I went, did some research for the summer on metastatic breast cancer, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the people I was working with, the experience, so I thought that's what I was going to do. So I applied to Mayo Clinic for graduate school. Most of the people, almost I'd say 90% of the people I graduated with went on to some form of education beyond getting a Bachelor of Science, because that was just the path you took in that particular institution. So I went to graduate school, got into Mayo Clinic, actually started in Jacksonville in that same lab, and then came up to Rochester to do a rotation. Here you do like 3 rotations in graduate school, and I just ended up staying in Rochester. I don't think I really knew where Rochester, Minnesota was before I came here. I
Many
did
people
fly
have that
in.
issue.
Yeah, I flew in for the graduate school interviews, which were in January, which is an atrocious time to bring anybody here. I mean, I thought I knew what winters were because obviously had seasons in Pittsburgh, but I would say on average it's at least 10 to 20 degrees warmer than it is here. I mean, it is actually pretty southern compared to here. Um, so it was just like a shock. I think it was minus 20. It's kind of shocking to me that I ended up coming here. But I just ended up staying primarily because initially they had graduate school students. And when I was in Jacksonville, it was pretty much just me. Like the school wasn't a big part of the community there. So I really didn't have like support. Ended up doing biomedical research at Mayo, where I met you. We were in the same research lab for 6.5 years. Pretty much during that time, I knew that I think the theme here is that I really knew I didn't want to do science this whole time, but somehow just kept getting funneled down that pathway and thought at one point it was going to click, and it never did. When I started graduate school, it was 2007. So 2007, 8, 9 were horrendous, economic years. So that was the best place I could be. I did enjoy the people I was working with, but knew it was something, when that time was done in graduate school, that wasn't something I was going to do. I knew that I had really strong communication skills. That was commented on as opposed to my science skills. So
that was not commented on, is what you're saying?
I just knew that was more of my strength. I actually never felt that I was good enough to be a biomedical researcher. I always felt way out of depth, that I was surrounded by people way smarter than me. I think that was partly saying that it just wasn't a fit. Even if that wasn't true, I don't know, it wasn't a fit. So after I was done with my graduate work in Mayo, I went to the Twin Cities, to the University of Minnesota for about 3 years. I thought I was going to get into maybe some kind of science writing. There was just more science industry there than here. There really was no opportunity at all outside of Mayo Clinic for a researcher. While I was there, I've always enjoyed like community, that feeling of untapped potential, that feeling of untold stories in community. So while I was at the University of Minnesota doing my postdoc, I intentionally chose a very flexible lab that they gave me time to explore other things. They understood that everyone doesn't go into the path of running their own research lab because it's not even possible with the funding mechanisms today. It's probably gotten worse now. I mean, this was like 4 years ago, maybe 6 years ago at this point. So during that time, I got an unpaid internship with what's now Medical Alley Association, which basically just supports medical companies in Minnesota. And it was about a 15-minute drive from where I was working. So I'd drive there once a week for, I think it lasted about 9 months, again, unpaid. And I was doing market research on, and somehow they gave me the animal health space, which was kind of unintentional, but it was a nice fit for me since I wanted to be a marine biologist, wanted to be a veterinarian. So that was kind of the start in learning about life science startups in Minnesota, and just really got pulled into that. Just, this community of exciting innovations. It was applying kind of my science training in a different way. But I just really got excited about, the potential there, and the feeling that not a lot of people knew about what was going on in these sectors and with the people running these startups and small businesses in Minnesota.
So, a lot to unpack there. So, as someone who, it's funny when you say that you don't know how you sort of fell into, say, like biomedical sciences. I think the same thing was true of me. I was going to be a lawyer, and that's the direction I was going to go. And then I suddenly had this like summer research experience, and I was like, oh, I guess I'll do this. And it really did sort of chart a course for the next 20 years of my life, which is just insane to think about. But, it's, we can realize that science isn't for everybody, but at the same time, I think I learned so much being in the sciences, just being able to apply a level of discipline and rigor that I don't think I've seen in many other sort of non-scientists. So, it's definitely been, I think, a positive for me, for sure. I just wanted to kind of pick your brain and see, do you think a lot of your scientific training has helped you in sort of the other careers you've jumped into since then?
I think absolutely. In a sense, I think a lot of it is the downside to it is I feel a lot of it was kind of undisciplined, that like you just had a lot of time to figure things out, whereas in business you don't, because I mean there is a money timeline in research, but maybe more because my experience was as a graduate student, you get a lot more flexibility in like what you're accomplishing in a time frame. But I think as far as I guess level of being intentional about testing things and understanding how to set that up to test if something is working, and then to have some way to understand if it's working or not. So setting up like mini experiments and a lot of things has been very helpful. I think communication, I think it allowed me the ability to communicate at a very technical level, and then kind of, I don't want to say down to, but two different audiences. So at a very technical level, and then, to a more general audience who might not be as familiar with terms. So I think it just allowed me to understand there are different audiences, and you have to be very intentional about who you're talking with. But I definitely don't regret it at all, because I think any education you have is extremely valuable. But I think it does, and in presentation as well, and in public speaking. When I first started out, I remember when I was in college, like we had to do one public speaking thing ever. And it was a huge deal. Like I was so terrified. I almost didn't even make it through it. And now it's like, I actually almost feel more comfortable like not preparing to give talks or doing, even when I was in school, graduate school, I started out really preparing for every presentation that I would have. And now it's just more of a level of comfort and I see people who don't have a lot of that experience really being held back by not being able to talk in public. So I think that's been one of the biggest things, because you talk in public all the time. Like it ends up being, you don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say for me, maybe there's a little fear still there, of course, but you get over these things, and you learn by doing, and that's what's super important. Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of Rochester Rising, which is the thing I think even today probably you're most known for in our community?
So I guess it actually did directly stem out of the medical alley experience, because after that, I just remember thinking, well, what am I going to do now with my spare time, where I was, trying to figure out what that next step was. So I remember emailing you or calling you at one point and just saying, I wanted to understand more of what was going on in Rochester. Um, my husband had kept his job down in Rochester. We were living in kind of the St. Paul suburbs at the time. So just thinking about, well, is there something down here that would make life easier? We could transition back. And we just started talking about what was going on in the community. And I think like a week later, I knew you were doing bio again at that time, and I think it was pretty short. It was a week later, if not a few days later. You were like, "Hey, I have some idea for you. Do you want to do this thing for free for me, and we can build community?" And I'm
Of
like,
course, I'm going to pitch the free thing because A, I
I'm
didn't
like,
have any money, and
well,
B, yeah.
so it was a thing. I had a job, but I also had flexibility, and part of like a postdoc is, and it definitely, it's giving you that platform to have that time to explore, which I was very grateful for. You're supposed to use that time to explore what your next step is going to be. So the problem with, jumping into a career in industry was that I didn't have any experience. So when you don't have experience and you can't get hired in even an entry-level job, you have to do stuff for free to get that experience. So that was basically what I was doing. So you pitched the idea of this life science nexus concept that was going to be basically an online blog talking about um, life science entrepreneurship, and we expanded it to Minnesota since I was in the Twin Cities. So
Yep.
that's how I got started. It was yourself, me, and Karishma.
Yep.
I can't think of her last name at this point. I think it was
Ranjani.
Ranjani.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we started that, and it was I just remember like I would have like a 45-minute bus ride in and then an hour bus ride back. So we do like business development in the morning. So we just like type away on Slack, and like, cause you'd have like Wi-Fi on the bus. So I'd like be working on the bus for like 45 minutes in the morning. And then I think coming home, I'd, read my science reading that I had to do. So it was kind of like a nice space. And because I had that flexibility, I take like my lunch hour and do a little bit of writing. So that's kind of how it started. I got to explore and meet a lot of cool people in the Twin Cities, and that's kind of where I started out learning about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, but really focused in on life sciences. So how I transitioned to Rochester Rising, we were working on this for, I think it might have been about a year. Sometimes my
Yep.
timeline gets accelerated or shrunk. It just kind of was a blur. And my postdoc was about to be up. We had gotten a bit of traction on Life Science Nexus. So, we had that discussion, and I decided that I was just you were starting Collider at that time. So this was probably 2016 summertime. About this time, actually 4 years ago, almost exactly. And I just decided, I felt I had enough stability, at least for a year or so, that I was going to leave that job and move to Rochester and see what we could make of it. So like I said, at that time you were starting Collider. When I came down to Rochester, I didn't feel that there was enough life science entrepreneurship to support what we were doing, and that there was just more need that wasn't being met. So in July 2016, pivoted this to Rochester Rising to tell stories of all entrepreneurs in Rochester, not just life sciences. And at that point, you kind of ran with Collider, and I kind of ran with this, just to really maximize skill set. So that was a really interesting time. And sometimes when I think back on it, it was totally crazy. I mean, we definitely didn't even have enough evidence that this was going to work.
No, I remember even that conversation. I think it was in the Mayo Business Accelerator, and we were chatting, and you said, well, I'd kind of learned about this person or this person doing something cool. Would it be okay if we expanded it a bit? And I was like, sure, why not? I mean, and I remember that conversation. And then I also remember the writing on the wall of the accelerator trying to come up with a name for this thing. But those are the two things that, and then suddenly I was like, yeah, why would we limit ourselves to the life sciences? I think probably because we both come from that life science background. That was always my sort of focus. But to your point, I mean, we had zero evidence that there was even an interest in this, and I
No.
think that, again, we're all about testing, right? And we teach classes together, which is all about testing and trying to prove things. But I think sometimes you just have to try it and see what happens. And I think that, it definitely had more traction, I think, from the beginning than Life Science Nexus did, just because it was a lot more broad. But definitely, the other thing I noticed is, I don't know if it's still in the feed for Rochester Rising, but if you go back before that, there was something called, I believe it was called the Life Science Nexus podcast.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I did I would say at least 10 of those, which was sort of it was made to be a supplement to Life Science Nexus, sort of the blog. And then I remember at some point asking you, or you wanted to interview someone, and I'm like, here, take my podcast equipment. And I don't think I ever got it back. It was like,
Yeah.
here you go. And it was again, my memory's a little sketchy too, but I just remember like hearing your first couple podcasts, and I was like, oh my God, she is so much better than me at this. Like, why is she not just doing this? And being like a lifelong being, I've listened to podcasts since 2003, when you had to download them and sort of format them correctly and put them onto your computer. I knew right away that you were so good at this, and it was just like, man, how can we continue to support what you're doing? And that's when I knew, when traction started happening and when the podcast was starting to take off, that it was time to let you just run with Rochester Rising, because I knew you could make it work. And I think ultimately, I mean, it's been very successful ever since, which is another case for never involving me in any project. As soon as I'm removed, then things become successful.
It was funny, like we had just come up on the 4-year anniversary, and you get these like spam messages occasionally through Squarespace, and like the first or second, it might have been like the second story I ever wrote, was about the food trucks, and I talked to Derek Chapman, and it was just a joke, because we put like that conversation was not a joke, but like the titles were kind of a joke, because they were just like placeholders, and I titled one, and you might have to cut this, I don't know, we'll see. The title of it was Food Trucks Burned Down Peace Plaza, and I didn't realize like it gets tagged in, like if you copy and paste the URL, like once you originally name that, it's there forever. And someone spammed me like last week and was like, oh, we saw this great article, and it copy and pasted it, and it's like Food Trucks Burned Down Peace Plaza. And I'm like, oh my God, it just lives there forever.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't know. It must be just like when you title an article in Squarespace, you can never get it out of the URL. That's just
I think the URL is actually just the words with dashes in between. I think that's how they set it up. So that's interesting.
It stayed forever.
Well, it's a good lesson of probably what not to do, but definitely early days, and we were learning.
It did get changed. Just something about like Twisted Barrel, but that was
that's one of those things that I think sometimes we have a lot of like. I know I like to always have a code name for something when I'm working on it, and some of them are just really nuts. So definitely, I think that just shows that at least we are always, maybe we kind of appear like we're serious. I don't know if we do. It depends on the public's perception, but I think we have a lot of fun in what we do too. So
I don't even remember
how
that happened. Yeah, why I did that, but I think we were just like mocking up the website or something.
Yeah, that could be, or and it could be that if you think back to that time, I mean, it was there was some tension there
Yeah.
between, food trucks and local downtown restaurants, and there's a lot involved in the permitting process and stuff like that. So it was a very tense time where, so maybe we were just, kind of filling out the website and being like, oh, well,
I
what will
I think
happen when the food trucks start to burn down downtown?
yeah, I think that's exactly what had happened, what the sentiment was at the time. So that's, yeah, how it got in there as a placeholder.
So good lesson. Never use real words as placeholders.
Yeah.
Lessons learned. Yeah. So, you've done almost 200 podcasts, which is just nuts. I thought at 50, you'd be like, I'm done with this. And you kept going. And I mean, first of all, phenomenal. Like, I would have never, not, it sounds bad. It sounds like I have zero confidence in you. Like, you would have never done this. But I just, it's amazing when you hit milestones like that. That's really cool. And very few podcasts make it past episode 50. So, just like they say, 80% of all new companies will fail, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's true in the podcasting world too. So, and it's funny how many times in this community I'll be like, oh, Amanda, oh, the person that does Rochester Rising. And I'm like, yes. And now I'm jealous. But, no, it's definitely a testament. It's something that I think people really do love to listen to and to read. So I mean, thank you for all the work you do with that. That's just amazing. Um, so there, you transitioned into a role in the Office of Entrepreneurship at Mayo Clinic.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think again, I had been doing Rochester Rising for I think about a year and a half at that time. Um, and like we had talked about in the beginning, we kind of jumped into it without like thinking very much about it. So it definitely was not financially supportive, and I'd run out of that runway in about a year. I had taken some other jobs. At one point, I was doing 6 jobs, which was insane,
Wow.
and I totally had lost my sanity. So this was, uh, you know, I thought, and it was a good experience building that next level of credibility in the community, because like you were saying, people saw me as, oh, this journalist, and I've never for one second thought of myself as a journalist, and I still don't. I don't feel that that's what we're doing. So I really wanted to build up that credibility because I felt that I had more to offer than just telling stories. So I joined the Office of Entrepreneurship as the first hire in uh, February of 2018. Like, I think that's right.
I think
That
that's good.
seems
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that seems right. Um, and was there for a little bit over a year. It was really attractive to me because I knew the person running it. They were on my thesis committee when I was at graduate school. It was very new. So I had that opportunity to help shape where it was going to go. I was the first full-time person, and it was really just helping people by developing education and community. So that's why it was attractive to them, because they wanted to build community and also link what was going on inside Mayo with outside Mayo. So it was a really great experience. I got to do a lot of women-specific programming inside Mayo, which to my understanding, it's still going. So that's always positive, because you hope you want to leave something behind, but have it change. Um, so yeah, I was there for about a year and a little bit more, and then we again, I think when we had started thinking about what we were doing in whatever 2014, I think realistically we always had an idea for a nonprofit. That what we were thinking of should have been a nonprofit, but that takes a little bit more time. You have to get grant funding, sponsorships and things. But what we were doing was always really more education and support, instead of like more focused on a pay to play model, because we were helping people. So I remember sitting down in January of 2019, one of us had found this grant through the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, which we had been, I think we actually had gone to their eShip, their entrepreneurial summit the year before. I think
Yep.
that was the timeline.
Yep.
So we knew about the 1 million cups through the Kauffman Foundation, and we saw this grant opportunity to support basically what we were doing. So we applied to it, thinking nothing would happen in January of 2019. And I think there were like almost 1,000 applicants from across the US, something like that.
Yeah, we had. It's funny. I always think like we had no right to write that grant. I mean, yes, we did, but it's just like, there were so many other organizations that I think, were established at that point, and we were just in the process of sort of pivoting to a nonprofit model. Um, but yeah, I think it was that early part of that year that we just sort of, again, we maybe this is the story of how things work, right? We just started writing just to see, because we both have backgrounds in grant writing, more probably at the NIH level, National Institutes of Health. So I think we both felt qualified that we could write this thing. It's just it was a different type of grant, but it never hurts to try, right? And that's where I think at least the position I was taking as we were writing it is, let's try to capture some of the hopes and dreams of what we would want to do if we just were magically selected, which of course we never would be, and let's just go for it.
Yeah. So I think we were kind of surprised when it might have been in like February that year, we learned we got into the second round. And then I think in May, we learned we were in the final round of it. And yeah, I think it just kind of went from there, and we officially got to start in October. I think about July, I started transitioning out of the Office of Entrepreneurship job because we had a lot of planning to do, and
Yeah.
we had a lot to like get moving and transitioning everything. And we didn't know what we were doing with Rochester Rising at that time. And when we started writing it, obviously we didn't think we were going to get the grant, and we didn't think Rochester Rising was going to be part of the nonprofit in the beginning. And then we decided to do that because it made the most sense. And again, I had been doing so many different things for so many years that I just couldn't manage having like separate things anymore. It just needed to be funneled into one thing because it was getting completely unmanageable and very, very stressful and really wearing down on me. So I just knew I couldn't do that anymore. Um, so yeah, I think that brings us to where we are today.
Yeah.
Um,
So, how I knew you were going to ask me a question. I could feel the interviewer kick in. How do you? So, what's your role right now at Collider?
so right now, officially, I'm the director of communications, but I think we all do a little bit of everything. So it's continuing to run the Rochester Rising website. I think both of us kind of manage the Collider social media. It's kind of like, it's not really just mine. It's both of us.
Mhm.
And then I also basically am the program manager for our ecosystem navigator program. So that was what grant we got from the Kauffman Foundation to kind of launch this. And the ecosystem navigator program is specifically to empower 3 individuals in the community to serve as community connectors, helping people understand what resources exist in the community, helping them to form a network and connect them into what they need next to move their business forward. And this is for this pilot program, it's especially geared towards people who have systemically been left behind, including minority entrepreneurs and women. So that's basically what I've been doing. My main focus is that grant, to set that up and to understand about the ecosystem. Collider did 100 listening sessions in the community, really with specifically, again, focused on minority entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, and those supporting those entrepreneurs in the community, really to understand, where the gaps and assets were in the community. So that was a process. We just kind of wrapped that up in March once COVID hit. I did the final couple via Zoom. So that's, yeah. that was a large chunk of my time, and now we're just getting ready to share that with the public. It was a lot of information to sift through, to make sure uh, people put a lot of trust in us to tell that story. So being very intentional about how those stories are being told, being very respectful of the individuals involved. Nobody knows who, except for myself, really, who was interviewed for those sessions. So we're being very mindful and protective of those identities, just because it's very important information for our community to have. So, in a nutshell, that's my role at Collider.
Yeah, I was really impressed just how thoughtful people were, how willing they were to really speak up about a lot of different things. So yeah, that was an amazing time. I think if we look back in a few years, we'll be like, wow, that really is what spurred sort of the future growth in our community. At least I feel. I'm a little biased, I know, but
We hope.
um, we hope. So what has been over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of challenges in the world. There's been some crazy times happening, but if you could think back in the last 6 months, what's been a real bright spot about the work you've done to support entrepreneurs?
Oh man, yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it was very hard in the beginning when we started. I mean, even when I started in 4 years ago, nobody knows who you are. Nobody trusts you, and why should they? Like you haven't done anything. They don't know who you are. So that was very hard starting out. I think I had to rely on you for the majority of the contacts that I had, and now I just email people, and most of the time now they've kind of heard of Rochester Rising, so it's not even like an issue getting them on for an article or a podcast. But the past 6 months, it was challenging starting out these interviews because we know our circle, but we wanted to get beyond that circle, and building that trust in different communities within Rochester. And it's still going to take time, but I think that's been the biggest spot, just seeing like, you know, relationships developing with people that I didn't know before, and them being really interested in what we're doing, being able to help with that, and being able to help them as well. I think that's the most exciting thing, that we've been working on, and seeing those relationships kind of blossom. Um, I'm trying to learn Spanish to help with some of those relationships, which I would never thought I'd be doing, a year ago.
That is
Just
going the extra mile.
well, just to at least be able to read something, if not just like help with a little bit of direction when talking with somebody if they're not totally comfortable. Just having some sort of communication, and just we should, as Americans, we only speak English. That's kind of ridiculous. We should be able to speak another language. So I've been working on that. And yeah, I think it's just seeing some of those relationships really start to get some traction now.
So speaking of that traction, um, if you could imagine a vision in the future for entrepreneurship in Rochester, and we don't have to like have a fully fleshed out vision, of course. What would that vision look like? What would say in the next 10 years, this sort of field of entrepreneurship or entrepreneur, I don't know if entrepreneurship is really a field, but um, what could you see Rochester sort of evolving into for entrepreneurs in the next
Yeah,
10 years?
I guess my hope is that it just would be a space where entrepreneurship was more visible, and it was more ingrained into the culture as not like the alternative route, which I feel that it is a little bit now. And I really would hope that, my vision for what it would be in, let's say, 5 years from now, is that just if someone's interested in entrepreneurship, first of all, there's a culture where people are talking about it more, where it's not just like, it doesn't seem so risky because more people are doing it. You don't try to get talked out of it. There's just more starting. And I think to do that, first of all, you need that culture of acceptance of it and support. just on like an individual level. We're not even talking about financial at that point. And then I think just more of a community where people would be more easily connected in and be able to access those resources that they need better, and know when and how to access them and what's relevant for what they're doing. That's kind of, but it all starts at culture and having entrepreneurship be more of an ingrained part of the daily activities in this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are 100% on track. Amazing. We work together that we would sort of group things, but that culture is so critical. And I still feel like, the reason I got involved in the ecosystem was all around trying to, I wouldn't say change the culture, but modify the culture into one of acceptance, a little more broad acceptance of entrepreneurs and a little more support. And I still, I get up in middle of the night and 2 a.m. thinking, I still don't feel that culture's there. So it's definitely something we need to work towards as a community. I think we're getting there, but it takes a long time. The immortal words of Brad Feld is, this sort of work in ecosystem building takes about 20 years, and that 20 years starts from the day you get involved, and that's your personal 20-year journey. I feel really old that, I'm approaching now my 8th year of doing stuff like this. I can't imagine what year 20 looks like. Probably a great retirement party for me, if nothing else. But totally agree that your vision is spot on, and hopefully that's what we're working for at Collider. So last couple questions to wrap things up. What is one thing that people may not know about you that you may find interesting? A different hobby, that you have 12 kids, something that maybe we don't know.
I should have saved the Shamu thing for this.
Oh, come on, you can come up with something else.
Yeah, probably. I do. I should have saved that one. So,
I think
think
the third podcast for Rochester Rising should be called Saving Shamu.
saving Shamu. I think like maybe something people just don't know about me too much. So, now that I've been able to, focus in on maybe 1 or 2 jobs instead of 6, I've really been focusing in on my own like hobbies and interests, and like slowing down a little bit. And one thing I've always loved doing is baking. Like I said, I grew up in an Italian American family, and every Sunday, we went to mass, then I had to go to Sunday school, and then I would walk down the street to my grandfather's house and we would bake. So that really kind of takes me back to that time. So that's something that I've really started doing again. So I really love to bake. And it also goes back to science too. I was thinking about that yesterday as I was baking, that, it's not like cooking. It has to be very exact and precise, or it's not going to work. Especially the more challenging things, when you go beyond like the cookies and into like pastries and things, it's pretty exact, or it's just not. It's not going to work out how you think it's going to. So I feel like people do know that I do that, but probably not everybody.
Oh, I definitely say outside of the co-working space,
Yeah.
occasionally we benefit from your experiments in the kitchen, which are excellent. That I don't know, I think that's great. It's always so important to have something to fall back on, hobbies, interests, and I'm always fascinated by what people do in their spare time, if such a thing exists. Because it's truly interesting, just the wide variety of things that people choose to get excited and to fuel them, and hopefully create better work as an output. So last question, who is someone in the community right now that's doing great work to support entrepreneurs besides me?
I think that's a great question. I'm going to say 2, and I'm just going to do it really quickly. I think the first would be HACER. the spanning advocacy and community empowerment through research. They are based in St. Paul, but they are doing a lot of work in Rochester pilots, a pilot program called Crando Anda that they started in June, I believe. And they really had to pivot this like significantly with COVID. I think it was supposed to start in April originally. But they're just really trying to, a lot of what we learned too is, starting way up at top the entrepreneurial funnel, just getting people comfortable with entrepreneurship and building up their leadership skills and confidence levels and doing that. So that's one organization that I don't know that a lot of people know much about. And the second I'm going to say real fast is Mary Grove at Bread and Butter Ventures. I just did a podcast with her and Pam York, another female venture capitalist. And, a lot of, when we were talking about a lot of barriers that hold people back is not having access to these people. And they've actually opened up open office hours where people can connect in with them. And when you've talked with, when you read books or learn more about venture capital, a lot of it is like personal network and referral in. And this is really trying to dismantle that model of they're accessible, just, click a button and meet with them. So I'm hoping that really kind of has a lot of impact in changing the venture capital space here in Minnesota.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for taking the time to join us and sharing your story with us. Where can people find you again? Collider.
Yeah,
it's always so funny, but
probably the best place is on Rochester Rising. So it's rochesterrising.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube and Twitter. And you can find me in the Collider co-working space. Just wear a mask. But that's
Good
where
point.
we are.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
All right. Thank you.